Hey guys, it's Horror Free for All, better known as Goosebumps Completionist, and I hope you're doing well today. So I have here a book review from the HorrorLand series, and it comes from Arc 2, and in fact, this is the inaugural book of that run. And we're going to be looking at book number 13, When the Ghost Dog Howls. So this book caught my eye on the shelves when I first got back into Goosebumps collecting about 5 or so years ago. And I was always curious to see what Stein was able to do with this one because on the onset, it looked like The Barking Ghost. And from the sound of it, at least the reception I was able to see online and through asking people about this book, that it appeared to be a step up from The Barking Ghost. However, with that aside, there is a lot of wavering opinions and all over the place takes on this book alone that I've come across on the internet, ranging from this book is terrible to mid slash forgettable to even being one of people's favorite Horrorland books, period. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll save this one. And after reading this, I have to say, I think I've solidified what I plan on doing for, I guess, ranking the Horrorland series. I've officially decided now to split up Arc 1 and Arc 2 in their own rankings because getting into this one, it's been a while since I've read an Arc 2 Horrorland book. So far, I've read Heads You Lose, Weirdo Halloween, Slappy New Year, and this one now. So I'm down to two plus the finale book. Um, and these are pretty much not like the first 10 books in the Horrorland series. This has a completely different setup, and almost every book in this arc revolves around cursed items that are purchased or given to characters within the Horrorland theme park at this souvenir store owned by Jonathan Chiller. So because of the format differences and all of that, I've officially decided to split them up. But judging the book on its own merit, on my opinion of it, since this was the first time read, I have to say I was kind of disappointed with this one. You know, I kept hearing that this is the better Barking Ghost. It's the better Be Careful What You Wish For. And it's a happy marriage of those two books if you put them into the blender. And while I can kind of see that, and I think there's some cool aspects to this book that are really stand out and pretty cool and like pretty well done for the most part about it, I just don't think that this is a game-changing Goosebumps book out there or all that memorable one. You know, it was in one ear out the other. And that I think that kind of plays into, I guess, the relevancy that I've noticed about Arc 2 Horrorland as a whole. And there's some books in Arc 2 Horrorland that basically just never get talked about in casual discussion. I think this is one of them, but I do see this one getting brought up more than some other books, maybe like Little Shop of Hamsters or The Wizard of Ooze, for that matter. But I definitely think that this one is also just basically not talked about in the community. It might as well be invisible. And after reading it, I can understand why. Because, yeah, I really don't know what else to say about this one. It's one hell of a way to get back into reviewing Goosebumps, I guess. You know, I'm trying to get back into reading Goosebumps and getting, you know, into the stuff that I haven't touched on yet because I've been in the mood and I think I'm finally out of my rut I've been in with the series so far in 2025. So yeah, what a way to come back, I guess, for reviews. However, I have casually read quite a few Goosebumps books over the year that I just haven't sat down on camera to review, and I'm rereading some for posterity, but I do have a couple of Goosebumps reviews coming pretty shortly after this one, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, you know, I guess we can go ahead and talk about When the Ghost Dog Howls. If you're not acquainted with what I've been doing, I guess, in the past short while with reviews, I'm no longer going into too much depth in the plot of reviews. I'm just going to keep it very brief and surface level so I can get to the review portion because that's pretty much why you guys are here for the most part. So all you really need to know about When the Ghost Dog Howls is like the story starts off pretty much how every Arc 2 Horrorland story starts out. You get introduced to a character or multiple characters. In this case, we get to meet the main character of the story named Andy and his cousin Marnie, who are, I guess, perusing Horrorland and having a spooky old time. But they end up in this morbid circus with this clown named Murder the Clown. And if you're asking, is this Murder the Clown the same Murder the Clown that's in A Nightmare on Clown Street? From what I gather, I don't think they are the same. But I do think that maybe this clown might have been the inspiration behind, I guess, Stein's different version that he put into the Most Wanted series. And once these kids have a run-in with this demented circus of sorts and have this whole thing with Murder the Clown possibly, pulling their chain with what's real and what isn't real in the circus, the two kids end up in Jonathan Chiller's souvenir shop. And lo and behold, when the kids are looking around these huge shelves, our main character, Andy, stumbles across this necklace with a yellowish tooth, hanging from it. And it catches his attention. And the shop owner, Jonathan Chiller, essentially doesn't want to sell the kids this tooth necklace because it goes back to Scottish folklore, of all things. And it's associated with this urban legend surrounding this dog called the Blue Curlew Hound that was said to have haunted a northern Scottish village, I guess hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And it took the help of a sorcerer to put a stop to the hound. And what he ended up doing is stealing the tooth of the hound and essentially damning it forever to be in search of it. And it's said that this tooth can grant any wish that the owner possibly could want, and it will come true. But if you use the tooth, it brings the hound closer and closer to you, and eventually it might come to bite you, right? So knowing this information, the kids are like, yeah, you know what? We are not buying into the legend here. I think you're just giving us a spiel to purchase it, but you've done your job. We want the tooth. And Jonathan Chiller's like, you know what? No charge. I want to give this to you because you guys seem really interested in it. But seriously, take my warning as advice. And he also gives them like this souvenir horror that they can put along, I guess, with their tooth when Andy takes it home. So when Andy takes home the Blue Curlew Hound tooth here, him and Marnie immediately start playing around with the tooth, making some innocent wishes, but realize that the wishes are coming true. And once the kids realize that they have basically unlimited power in their hands, the two start to bicker over how often they should use it and if they should tell people that they have it, right? And shortly thereafter, Andy, at night when he's asleep in his bed, starts to hear howling outside. And to his knowledge, none of his neighbors have dogs, or there's no known dogs to live in the nearby area of his house. So he starts to think that maybe, just maybe, this hound is real and is coming after them, or I guess him in particular. It all culminates one day when Andy goes to school and his cousin Marnie, who also goes to the school, essentially, corners him to be able to use the tooth for a wish. And Andy's standoffish and they have some disagreements. And this leads up to a scene where the two go shopping at a mall together, where I guess they run into each other at the mall or something like that. And this whole thing happens with Andy misusing the tooth, which is also another thing I didn't touch on with Jonathan Chiller, but essentially there's a mechanism that if the tooth gets wet, it can shock you and kind of make your brain all confuzzled. And this, of course, happens to Andy, and there's quite a few chapters in the middle of the story here where Andy's basically going through a dreamscape. And once Andy's out of that, there's a I guess, quote unquote twist about Marnie possibly being the new owner of the tooth. And from here on out, Andy has to kind of sift through the gaslighting of Marnie, uncover the truth of really what happened before he got shocked. And this leads into the climax of the story where potentially the blue curlew hound comes out of the woodwork through, I guess, a prank to get back at Marnie. And we find out what's the result of that. And by the end, we realize if the blue curlew hound, I guess, gets its tooth back or not, and what's going to become of these kids. So that, in a nutshell, is all you really need to know about When the Ghost Dog Howls. Now, I'm going to be upfront. This book did have a surprising amount of positives for me. The first big one I have with this book here is basically my biggest compliment I've had so far with pretty much every single Arc 2 Horrorland book. And that is, I love the setup to these. Look, Arc 2 Horrorland, I think, is the better way to go than Arc 1. Even though Arc 1 I heard is absolutely epic with the inter-Horrorland, back segments of the first 10 books, mixed in with book 11 and book 12. It's an epic, basically MCU crossover level event in Goosebumps, right? And I get that to a degree, why people really love that. And that might be more preferred because of the legacy of Horrorland. And maybe you have a lot of nostalgia with that. But if we're talking just on an anthological base, like a standalone book basis, right? You don't have to read these in order. Arc 2 Horrorland, you can pick up whichever one you want first and get right into it. And what's fun is that they throw you into these situations in Horrorland with these kids, and they get to interact with different characters in the park, and then they end up at Chiller's house. They get this cursed item to bring back home with them, and this cursed item story becomes basically the bulk of the story, and then by the end, Chiller comes back to, I guess, collect on the gift they've been given, right? That's essentially the plot formula in all these books, but it's still really fun here. The opening, I guess, prologue to this book, I should say, was really fun with the Killer Circus and Murder the Clown. I guess the prototype of Murder the Clown, I should say. That was really fun stuff, even though it was kind of rendered to be kind of hokey and corny in some ways. I still like that aspect, and getting to explore the circus act of Horrorland was really cool. And there's some really disturbing imagery and scenes in that involving, weapons being impaled into people's skeletons and decayed zombies, and how they look was really gross. It's pretty good stuff, Stein. Stein's prowess in this book was pretty well done for the most part when it came to describing the horror when it is there in the book, which coupled with the epic prologue made that part pretty cool. And then, essentially when the story starts with the Houndtooth and getting into the lore, this book surprisingly, and I mean surprisingly, delivered what most object-focused stories in Goosebumps fail to deliver, and that is a competent origin of an item with a very simple and easy to follow rubric of how it operates, its origins and what have you, and the consequences of misusing it. It's all laid out beautifully in this book, and it's almost like a cool template of how to do an object-focused Goosebumps book. And I'm surprised that if this book makes it look that easy, how come some of the more iconic books in the franchise that are object-focused based don't have this rich of lore? Which it does upset me in hindsight, thinking on the better books out there with a similar setup to this, but I digress. But nonetheless, it's really well done here. I think Stein goes the extra mile when it comes to that, even though it's not much, but it's definitely a lot to me, and it speaks volumes here. So for that, I really like that. And there's a cool aspect to this book involving the, folklore and the titular villain, the Blue Curlew Hound here, where normally when you have stories with wishing involved, normally it's pretty much stubbed down to, you get bad wishes when you make these wishes. And it's actually even commentated by the characters in this book to be like a cliche, which I thought was really cool. But this one takes a different approach and basically says any wish you can think of will come true. That is not the limitation here. The limitation for you is that the more you use it, it's almost like a beaconing signal for this ghost dog to come find you because it's looking eternally for its missing tooth, which I think is a really cool setup. And I'm not going to lie, even though it's kind of repetitious in this book, which is a mild deterrent to it, I do feel that there are some scenes here where you really do feel like the ghost dog is impending, it's coming. And while it's not necessarily tension, I do like that you do kind of feel the presence of this entity throughout the story. And when he finally does come way later in the book, which is also another negative, it takes a little too long to get there. I think the Hound, for what it does and what it's supposed to do in the story, has a pretty threatening aura to him. Even though getting rid of him is very easy, but it requires some, I guess, self-restraint and no wherewithal to do it. But that aside, great stuff. Great stuff with that. And yeah, I would say my last compliment to it, I guess, is the climax for the most part. Maybe not the resolution and the ending following it, but I thought that the book built it up pretty nice, even though it was basically built off the back of getting even with your cousin and all of that involved with the pranking and what have you. I still think that the climax with the blue curlew hound was serviceable. It was pretty good stuff for what it was. So yeah, pretty solid positives with this book. Unfortunately, this book kind of fell apart. I really do feel that this book kind of fell apart. And I guess the main things I want to stress here, and I guess this is my first negative with the book, are the two main characters, Andy and Marnie. Marnie is terrible. Marnie has to be one of the most annoying characters in Goosebumps history. And it's not like, Marnie is like evil or anything. I just think that she is beyond selfish, beyond self-centered. And she makes that perfectly clear throughout this book. And the fact that she goes through all the links to gaslight Andy after he has that run-in with the tooth shocking him and sending him into like a mental daze and all of that just shows her true nature as a character. And even by the end of the story, when you think that these kids have learned something, Marnie, of course, learns absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And it's beyond insufferable. I can understand why people absolutely dislike Marnie. I think Marnie might be low-key one of the most hated Goosebumps characters of all time when you really sit down and think about it. I don't know top 10, but it's pushing. It's pushing. She was awful. And Andy, I think Andy, he's a serviceable character, but he does have some annoyances to him. I think on the surface, he understands that this tooth actually is a threat. It actually is a problem. Clearly, Marnie doesn't understand that. So, compared to her, he looks like a saint in this book. But, unfortunately, I don't think that Stein really utilized his character in the best ways. Especially after the mall scene and after the shock, I feel like his character just hit a brick wall. And it just became like him trying to figure out if Marnie was gaslighting him for like a good chunk of the remaining chapters of the book until we get to the climax. And I just feel like we could have spent a lot more time there building on to him maybe doing some independent investigation into the Curlew Hound and all of that instead of just dumping all this attention into him trying to prove to himself that Marnie is lying. It's just boring. It's just really boring. It feels catty. It feels like we're going down the rabbit hole of these former, heyday Goosebumps stories that involved, getting even and trying to prove people wrong who are like terrible characters in these books. I'm over it by this point. If this was like one of the earlier reads I read, in my time reading Goosebumps as an adult, I probably wouldn't bat an eye to it. But because we're this far in, I just think these characters kind of just stick out like sore thumbs to me. And for that, I think Andy, I do also couple with Marnie as a negative here. Um, which brings me to the pace in the story. I feel like this story is kind of all over the place. At first, it goes into the expected route of them playing around with the loaded gun. This is another one of those loaded gun allegory stories like Say Cheese and Die, where they literally can make any wish happen. So if you accidentally make a wish like Andy does against Marnie in the story, that has something harrowing happening to Marnie, you have to deal with the consequences of that until you fix it, right? So they're playing around with this loaded gun, testing out these wishes, and then they're playing around with the idea if they should tell people, if they should overuse it, if they should ignore the warnings of Jonathan Chiller and what have you. And while that's fine and dandy, once we get to the mall scene and the whole dream sequence fake out for like a few chapters going down into randomness, and I mean complete randomness, like there's like a ripoff of Planet of the Apes in this, like in a dream sequence. I'm like, what am I reading? And it's not even entertaining or fun. It feels like we're in filler. And while it does have some stakes, the dreams themselves, into the remaining part of the story, I feel like there could have been way different ways to have a setup for the need of Andy trying to gaslight Marnie into giving back the tooth. That's all I'm going to say there. But yeah, I don't know. This is just not for me. The dream sequence stuff didn't work. And like I said, the remaining plot just being like trying to convince himself that Marnie gaslit him is just not entertaining. It's boring. And so the story kind of flatlines. When we get to the climax, it does kind of ramp back up when the blue curlew hound finally shows itself in the story to the characters. But even then, I feel like he was kind of underutilized. The way he's defeated, it feels like the most obvious logical conclusion you could possibly have for this book happens. Or at least is made to make you think happens until the twist, which completely renders this story pointless. Which brings me like to the resolution of the climax and the ending. I think that this book is absolutely pointless given that. It's making me feel like I wasted my time reading this thing. And I don't like going out on that note with books. You know what I mean? Like, if a book is kind of boring, kind of whatever, I'm thinking to myself, I probably will forget this in a few months or something. And then you get a ending on top of that that makes it feel like it was all for nothing. That's just the turd cherry on the top. Did not like that. When it comes to like the pace, I kind of touched on it. It's just, like I said, all over the place along with the plot. So that is also another deterrent. You'll have some points of the story where it feels organic and then they're rushing through certain things just to have, I guess, like, some scares in the story, like the dream sequences and trying to make you think something is happening when it's not actually happening and stuff like that. And then, it goes to kind of like a slog pace after that. And then when the climax happens, it feels like it's rushing through it. So it's one of those stories that just have hobbling pace to it as well. And I feel like I've kind of touched on all the main things here in terms of negatives. But if I had one last one, when it comes to the Curlew Hound, I do feel like when it comes to the scenes where he's said to be howling outside the window of Andy, I also feel like that is kind of repetitious in the story. And it takes a long time for the story to venture outside of that to get some blue Curlew Hound action. And coupled with that, Andy's prank he has involving Marnie and this neighbor's dog that comes into the equation of the story kind of felt just shoehorned in there and rushed as all get out to, I guess, be a way to create a fake out in the climax, which is also another mild irritant with it. But yeah, it could have been way better with this Hound character and made more of a focal point, given how good the folklore is and how rich the backstory is presented with it. So all in all, yeah, this book, y'all. I mean, I'm really struggling with this. I'm obviously not going to give this book an A because I do have some issues with it, and honestly, these issues are medium, most of them. So they add up and add up and add up. So it's not getting an A. I don't think it's going to get a B at all either. So at the high point, we're looking at a C. But then again, I'm also kind of looking at that D tier for this because while it has a lot of C tier qualities, the boring aspect to this book and just how forgettable it is kind of sinks it even further for me. But here's the thing. And I think I'm going to go with a C tier for this, which might shock a lot of you, but I'm going to definitely go on the lower end of it. And the only reason why is that I do think that the folklore and backstory is pretty cool. I do like the swings at the object-focused story. Here, actually having some sort of legitimate backstory and all of that to be had and chew on, which is really appreciated. And because it has that, I'm willing to be nicer to it. Because if it didn't have that, this would probably be like a low D tier kind of book. Like something like How I Met My Monster or something, just really forgettable. Even though this is a step up from, ghost dog stories out there in kids' horror, like The Barking Ghost and The Tale of the Hungry Hounds, for an example. Clearly, it's an evident upgrade. I wouldn't say it's full-on good because of that. But I think it's solid enough to give a C. So I probably would lean maybe like a 3.5 out of 5 stars flat for this, which is like a 7 out of 10. Now that might be kind of high, but I also curve kids' horror books by a full point. So take that for what you will. I think that this is a C minus. It's decent, maybe decent at best, but it's kind of a light good, kind of. I struggle with calling this book good. Decent's probably the better adjective. I could totally see if you skew lower with this one. I could totally see if you skew higher. Maybe if you like these type of stories where it's more character driven and character drama driven, this might do it more for you. Or maybe you like the dynamics, or maybe the over the top nature with like Marnie, for example. Well, actually, I don't know why you would like Marnie, but if you like her for her being a bad character, sure. But that's just where I'm at with it. It's just kind of a shoulder shrug, in one ear, out the other kind of book. But, I've read way worse, but I've also read way better. So yeah, that's my thoughts on When the Ghost Dog Howls. Let me know down in the comment section if you've read this book before. Do you love it? Do you hate it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.